I'm Scott McCrory, and I'm an alcoholic, and I do use my last name because if I ever end up in the hospital and you go looking for Scott M in the hospital, it's going to be hard to find me. My sobriety date is October 3rd, 1981. I have a sponsor. His name's Brian B. I have a home group, which is the three-way panel discussion meeting that meets on Zoom Saturday night at 8 o'clock. And it's a little different kind of a meeting. We we used to meet in person, but now that we have Zoom, we meet online and you write your questions in chat, and the panelists of various lengths of sobriety, they end up answering those questions with their experience, strength, and hope. And it's a pretty cool meeting. So if you have an opportunity, get with me. I'll post it up there in chat later. Uh, let's see. I was born in South Carolina to a father that was a drill instructor on Parris Island Marine Base. My parents split when I was 3, and my mother moved to New York, Newburgh, New York, which is about an hour north of New York City. And that's where I grew up until I was 18. I always felt like I was a little different than everybody else. And I had dyslexia. I still have it, but I just never seemed to fit in. And I'd be hanging out with my friends, and let's see, I started drinking when I went to get beers for my grandfather when I was a kid. They'd be shooting horseshoes, and they'd send me in to go get a beer for them, and they, I'd be 6 or 7, 8, 9 years old, and they'd get their beer, and I'd take a little sip here and there. Uh, my drinking really started on a regular basis when I was in middle school. And they used to have school dances, and I used to like the taste of Southern Comfort, and I would throw that in a can with some orange soda, and I'd be at the school dance drinking, and that was when I had my first blackout. And Soul Train was a big thing back then, and they had the line set up, and I only remember a couple of bits and pieces of that night. But what I do remember most about it was that following Monday when I was back at school, everybody's patting me on the back and saying I was cool, and I honestly didn't know what the hell happened. But a few people told me that I was dancing and I was doing a good job at it. And another thing that I remember about that night was my math teacher. He was in the bathroom smoking, and I bummed a cigarette from him and tried to give him a drink. But my drinking went on like that just on weekends mostly. Uh, my mom, she was a party girl. And I remember when I was like 10 years old, I got a phone call from her and she said she'd be home in a week. And that happened a number of times. She was either in the Bahamas or Vegas or Puerto Rico one time. And I was left to myself. I basically raised myself. Uh, my drinking continued in high school. I was always into art. You can see some of it back behind me there. And in 10th grade, at the end of 10th grade, I quit high school. And I was going to go to Vietnam. I was going to enlist to go to Vietnam. And my reasoning for that was because I heard they had good weed in Vietnam. And there's a little bit of drugs in my history. I mean, but I got lined up to get sworn in, and somebody got in my face and started barking at me like crazy. And I was like, look, I ain't sworn in yet. Take me home. I got lucky. So I ended up getting a construction job with a couple of guys in the neighborhood. Their dad had a drywall company. So I was working drywall, and we'd work our asses off and party at night and party even harder on the weekends. And blackouts were a regular occurrence, a regular occurrence. And went a year like that, and I got a phone call from a teacher that I had in 7th grade, an art teacher. And he told me he got transferred up to the high school and that I should come back to school. And I did. I ended up going back to school, and I ended up having to talk to the principal. And my grades before I quit were okay, but I had the points that they needed. I had to do the 11th and 12th grade at the same time, and I ended up graduating with my class. And I got a scholarship to an art college in upstate New York. And one of the things about that is I started out with like a 3.8 average, and it was a 2-year school. And by the time it was time to graduate with an associate's degree, I had like a 2.1 average. And my drinking just continued and continued and continued. In my final critique, I had laid a mannequin out with these wine bottles and a sign that said alcoholic. And that was like a premonition of things to come and an acceptance to come. From there, I ended up going out to California to San Jose State. And they had a Rathskeller bar. And I found that if I didn't drink in the morning, I could go to my class. But if I started my day with a beer, I never made it to class. And I ended up drinking myself out of that altogether. And things got really bad. I mean, hanging out with the wrong kind of people, doing the wrong kind of things. My progression had gotten worse. I'm 6 foot and I weighed 143 pounds. I got into other substances. Basically, it was more. Whatever whatever was around, more was what I wanted. Drinking was a constant. And I'm sitting in my car one night. I was asked to give this guy a ride, and I'm sitting out in front of the house, and the police raid this house, and his girlfriend's sitting in the front seat next to me. And I said, "Hey, we went and saw the movie King Kong. We're just sitting here talking. Stick to that story." And they separated us. She freaks out. My boyfriend's in there. And the cop's like, "What's the real story?" And I was like, "Well, I was over a friend's house and he asked for a ride. I had no idea where we were going, officer." I lied. And they let us go. And I got back to my apartment, and there were 2 cops knocking on my door. And they were like, "Have you been out all night?" And I got like, "Yeah, what's going on?" And he said, "Well, this one had a knife and that one had a baseball bat. And the guy with the knife cut the guy with the baseball bat." And I said to the officer, I said, "You know what? I go out for a couple of minutes and I miss all the action." But the turmoil and the I was freaking out. I couldn't get high. I didn't have anything to drink, but I had a friend who lived 2 apartment buildings over, and I figured I'd go over there. At least I could get a beer or two. And he wouldn't answer his door. And he finally, after about 15 minutes, he answered the door. And the guy who had the knife, he was in there. The cops were looking for him, and he had already drank up all his beer and whatever else he had. So I went back to my apartment. Now I'm going to back up here. 3 months before this all went down, I got a phone call, and it was from my mom. And my mom said this. She said, "You don't have to live the way that you're living, and you can get closer to God." And my response to that was, I get closer to God every time I get high, because every time I get high, I almost die. Somebody pulls a knife on me, a gun on me, or I wake up in my own vomit. And that was the most honest I had ever been about my drinking. And she just let me go. It must have killed her to do it, but she let me go. And then all this stuff took place. And I had this TV that had no vertical hold. It was a little small black and white TV, but I just had it there for the noise. And it must have been about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm just not knowing what to do. I was at the end of my rope. And one of those charter commercials came on. Are drugs and alcohol ruining your life? Call charter. And they flash the number up, and I'm thinking, yeah, drugs and alcohol are ruining my life, but where have I heard that before? And I was like, oh, mom, great. So my hair was down to my elbows, had a full beard, hadn't worn shoes in like 2 years. I was a hippie, had embroidered jeans. So I called mom, and mom said, "Are you willing to go to any length to get sober?" And I lied to her and I said, "Yes." I just wanted to get out of Dodge. I needed to get out of San Jose, California. And she said, "Well, then you need to come to AA. If you're willing to go to any length to get sober, you need to come to AA." And AA is in Fort Lauderdale. And I can tell by where everybody is here on this. We're from everywhere. We are everywhere now. But I was so crisp and so toasted. I had no idea anything about AA. I didn't know it was everywhere. So she wired me some money. I sold what I could, and I used a little bit of that money, and I had myself a little going away party. And I got in my car and I started driving. And I was detoxing in my car. And I didn't know what the hell was wrong with me. But by the time I got to Arizona, I saw this guy that looked like he might get high, and I asked him if he had a joint. And I was getting ready to go ask him if he had a joint, and I just like freaked out and got back in my car and just kept driving for another 2 hours. And I got to that next rest stop, and that same guy was at that rest stop. And it was like a sign from God that the guy got high. So I asked him if he had anything, and he's like, "Yeah, hold on." And he gave me a joint, and I smoked that down, and I started driving again, and I got to El Paso, and it was dark out, and I'm heading to the restroom at the rest stop, and somebody yells out, "Hey, you want to smoke a joint?" And I said, "I'll be right back." And I get back to these four guys, and they're sitting around the table, and they look at me and they go, "You got any?" And I like freaked out on these guys. I said, "You asked me, I didn't ask you. That is so uncool." And I start going off on these guys. And they're like, "Dude, here, chill out. Have a tall boy." So I'm sitting there and I'm drinking that tall boy, telling these guys how I'm on my way to AA. I was insane. Anyhow, I got about halfway through that beer and I felt a sense of ease and comfort come over me. And I found my new best friends because they helped me out. But that inner voice inside me said, "Dude, look at yourself. You need to get out of here, because if you don't get out of here, Mexico is just right over there, and you've never been to Mexico." And that other voice in my head, it's like I've got this battle going on, said, "Dude, you don't know Spanish. You can't go to Mexico. I mean, it was just insane. And I said, I got to go. And they gave me another one for the road. And I sat there calculating how many miles I was getting per gallon. And if I didn't eat anything, how many beers could I buy? And that inner voice said, dude, look at yourself. Normal people don't think like that. You must be an alcoholic. And that's when I said, God, if there is a God, please keep me driving. When I got to the Commercial Boulevard exit in Fort Lauderdale, I had 25 cents in my pocket and no gas. I was on E. And if I would have bought one beer, I never would have made it. I had to stay inside the area and I couldn't go through the toll because I didn't even have the money to pay the toll. So I had that quarter to make a phone call. Mom bailed me out, took me home. 3 days. I drove 3,000 miles in 3 days to get to my first AA meeting. She took me home, took me out to eat at a Chinese restaurant, and the waiter came up and said, would you like something to drink? And I got that battle going on. One side saying yes, the other side saying don't do it. And, little did I know a drink could have been a Coca-Cola, a glass of water. When I'm thinking a drink, I'm thinking a drink. And I finally, that one voice said, don't drink. It might screw up your mom's sobriety, and I didn't drink that night. The next day, she took me to the West Broward Club and introduced me to all the guys. And then she just let me go. They got me. They got a hold of me. I had, Zoom is great, but I'll tell you what, the way I got sober is they're like, here, sit here. And they started talking to me and telling me their stories. And I went to my first meeting. It was a beginner's meeting. And back then they asked who's a beginner, and they all raised their hand. And they're like, oh, if you got any questions, we'll ask you after the meeting. Just sit there, take the cotton out of your ears, stick it in your mouth. And a lot of those people were from like New York and stuff, and they came down, and a couple of them even knew Bill W., which was kind of cool. They had me help this guy Vince out. That's how I learned how to read the big book. Vince was blind. He had 17 years of sobriety then, and like sharp Italian guy, dressed to the nines, but he was blind as a bat. And he'd have me sit there and read the book to him, and I had to use a ruler because my eyes could not follow a line. I was just that messed up. And I'd read a line, and Vince would go, hey, could you read that to me again? And then I'd read it the right way without skipping, you know. So my first sponsor, his name was Joe S. He taught me how to have fun. Vince taught me how to have fun sober. Vince took me to my first young people's convention in West Palm Beach in 1981. It was amazing. I was like 2 months sober and never experienced that before. People hanging out, just having a good time. And I'm going to speed up a whole lot here because I don't have a whole lot of time. I met a girl. Boy meets girl on the AA campus and lust pursues. And we ended up getting married. We had a son. We were married exactly 20 years. November 27th to November 27th. God did that. My son, he ended up, he was bipolar. And he's doing okay now. He's like 35. Yeah. No, 30. Yeah. Damn, he is about 35. Anyhow, so when I got my divorce, I ended up moving to Louisville, Kentucky, because mom moved up here to Louisville, and home is where mom's at. I don't care who you are. It always seems to work out that way. Mom's still around. She's still going to meetings. Uh, she's got 39 years, 3 months, and a day more than me, which is a miracle, you know. She's in her 80s and she sponsors people and goes to meetings, and she just left yesterday to go to Alabama. She drove to Alabama with my stepfather. I mean, they don't slow down. And AA has given them a purpose in life in their retirement. And, that's one thing I want to mention is that AA has given me a purpose for life. I share my experience, strength, and hope. I was 22 when I got sober. You never have to drink again, even if you want to, no matter what you go through in life. And life's going to happen. I mean, I've been through divorce. I had a business. I lost a business. I got audited by the IRS. I got hit by a car while riding a bicycle in 2012, broke my leg in two places, and had to have 3 surgeries in a year to save it. I mean, life happens. But the one thing that I'll tell you that always seems to happen if you keep yourself in the center of Alcoholics Anonymous and you share what you're going through, you're going to find out that somebody else is going through it too. And they can tell you how to get through it without blowing your brains out, without drinking, without doing something stupid. And, you know, I am so grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the things that my sponsor and I do, and there's a group of us that do this, is 5 and 3s. 5 things that we're grateful for, and 3 things that we forgive ourselves for every day. I try to start my day like that, along with my readings and stuff like that. I still do the readings. When this whole COVID thing started, everybody was kind of freaking out. What are we going to do? They're closing down the clubs. They're closing down the meetings. How are we going to get to our meetings? And God worked that out for us, I think, because I look at all your faces here, and it just gives me another sense of gratitude that AA, I think, is going to grow even more because of the convenience of Zoom. So I love AA. I love life. My plan is to live to be 115. Dave, we were talking a little earlier about that. But, God's got another plan, but that's okay. I just plan for today. I live one day at a time, and I enjoy it as much as I can. And Stu, thank you for asking me to share a little bit. I mean, I could go on for quite a while. 39 years packs a lot of stuff in it, but I think that's the basics, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.